When the baby and I were home, I called Martin again. He didn't answer, but Barbara did.
Stop calling my son, you whore.
What? I wanted to tell Martin I had the baby.
He's not your husband anymore. You should be ashamed of yourself for being a horrible wife.
Barbara hung up the phone after that, and I didn't hear from her or Martin again until they were back in the country. My name is Andrea, and I loved my husband, Martin. The only issue we had was his mother, Barbara. She was too clingy to Martin since he was her only child. Martin didn't like it any more than I did, but he tolerated it. Since Martin traveled a lot for work, Barbara insisted on traveling with him. She said she wanted to travel before she got too old, but I knew she just didn't like the idea of not having power over Martin while he was away. She involved herself in everything. When I first realized that I was pregnant, I told Martin that he needed to tell Barbara to stop being controlling. I didn't want my pregnancy micromanaged by her. I'm the pregnant one. I should have control over this because it's my body. But Barbara's going to make this terrible. I've already given up so much because she insists on having control.
She has the best intentions, but she is a bit much. I'll talk to her.
A bit much? Barbara follows you on work trips.
She just wants to travel.
I hated that he believed her, but I let it slide since he'd agreed to talk to her. Except Barbara tried to control my pregnancy anyway. She insisted that I wasn't seeing the right doctors. And when I made a diet plan that changed our grocery list, she changed that too.
You have to eat more vegetables or you'll get fat.
My nutritionist...
I told you not to see a nutritionist. Now look at this mess. You're even imposing your ridiculous diet on my boy. Martin should be eating like a king, not a pregnant lady.
Martin saw the nutritionist with me. He's dieting too for solidarity.
Solidarity? Ha! You should be handling the pregnancy yourself.
Barbara was controlling and clingy, and she thought that pregnancy wasn't serious. She went through her pregnancy alone and decided that I should go through this alone too. I kept asking Martin to make her stop, and he kept promising he would. But her behavior never changed. A week before my due date, Martin had a business trip. I didn't want him to go because I was worried that I'd have the baby while he was gone. Barbara insisted that Martin had to go on the trip or that he'd fired from his job.
What will his employer think if he doesn't show up? They might even fire him for missing important meetings. If he takes off work for his pregnant wife before she even gives birth, they'll think he's unreliable.
I didn't want to keep arguing, so I let Martin go on the trip. Like always, Barbara had also made plans to travel with Martin. I was left alone. Normally, Martin was too busy to call on these trips, but this time I was upset that he hadn't called even once. I was going to have his baby. One night, I woke up unexpectedly. I was going into labor. I called Martin in a panic. He couldn't help me immediately, but I needed my husband to reassure me. The baby was a few days early, and he wasn't even in the country.
You've reached Martin's voicemail. I'm probably in a meeting right now. Leave a message and I'll get back to you.
No, please pick up. I called again with no answer. It must have been morning there because of the time difference, so I doubted he was still asleep. Maybe he was in a meeting. I called again. This time the call just ended like I'd been hung up on. There wasn't time to call again. I had to get to the hospital. Since I couldn't drive myself, I had to call for an ambulance. Thankfully, I got to the hospital in time to have the baby. Once the baby was born, I checked my phone again. No messages. Hours had passed, and there was no way Martin was still in a meeting. He must have seen that I'd called multiple times. When the baby and I were home, I called Martin again. He didn't answer, but Barbara did.
Stop calling my son, you whore.
What? I wanted to tell Martin I had the baby.
He's not your husband anymore. You should be ashamed of yourself for being a horrible wife.
Barbara hung up the phone after that, and I didn't hear from her or Martin again until they were back in the country. Actually, my lawyer called me first.
I got the signed divorce papers that Martin sent over. I'm surprised you decided to go through with it after all. I'll file them, and then you've got a few months before you're officially a free woman. Let me know if you need my services to sort out custody arrangements with the baby soon.
Months ago, when I was irritated with Barbara's controlling nature and Martin's reluctance to firm with her, I'd started filing for divorce. It was as simple as both our signatures on a piece of paper. I'd signed the divorce agreement in an overly hormonal state since I was halfway through my pregnancy, but tucked them away in my home office before I caused any real trouble. What did my lawyer mean that Martin signed them and mailed them in? I called Barbara directly, hoping she'd pick up the phone just to gloat about the divorce.
We're about to get on a plane. This better be important.
Give Martin the phone. Right now.
He doesn't want to talk to you.
I had to talk to Martin without Barbara around, so I waited until they were back in the country. Once they were home, Barbara commanded me to pack up all my things and leave, and that Martin and I would sort out the custody of the baby later.
And until custody is determined, the baby will be staying here, where Martin and I can look after it.
I'm not leaving her here with you. She's my baby. Martin, you can't be serious. Martin stood behind Barbara, and he looked exhausted. I knew he didn't like fighting with her any more than I did, but he just let her do whatever she wanted. This was why I had considered divorce in the first place, even though I realized it wasn't really what I wanted. I grabbed Martin by the hand and dragged him to our bedroom. Then I locked the door. I thought you had more of a spine than this, Martin. I don't know what she said to you, but...
Is that baby even mine, Andrea? I know you've been cheating on me. That's why you had the divorce papers ready.
What are you talking about? I haven't had an affair with anyone. The baby is absolutely yours. Do I need to get a paternity test done?
Maybe you should. It might help the custody arrangements.
Martin, listen to me. I never wanted to divorce you.
Then explain how Mom found divorce papers that you'd already signed. How long were you going to wait?
It was pregnancy hormones, and I couldn't stand your mom. She controls your entire life and you let her. I didn't want the rest of my life, or our daughter's life, to be controlled by Barbara. My yelling seemed to get through to Martin. He sat back on the bed and rubbed his face in frustration.
You're telling the truth? You really didn't want to.
I did think about it, but even though I was frustrated, I still love you. That's why I never mentioned it.
Then I have to talk to her. During the trip, she convinced me that you started cheating on me because I was away all the time, and that you'd been considering the divorce because the baby wasn't mine.
I swear she's your daughter, Martin. I had to have her alone because of your mother. Barbara is going to ruin our daughter's life the same way she's ruining yours. Suddenly, it was like Martin was a new man. He stood tall and squared his shoulders. It was sort of intimidating to see him like this instead of hiding behind Barbara. He marched out into the living room.
So, you told the whore to pack her things, right?
Pack your things, Barbara. I want you out of my house immediately. Call some movers if you must, but you're no longer allowed in this house.
Martin, my boy, what are you talking about?
I figured out what you did. My relationship with Andrea hasn't been perfect, but that was my own fault. I let you get in my head and manipulate me. I let you control every part of our lives, but not anymore. You're not my mother anymore.
There was nothing more humiliating than seeing a grown woman sob and beg her to let her stay in the house, especially since it was her own fault this had happened. Martin was firm in his decision, and Barbara moved out all her things by the end of the week. I was glad to see that Martin's confidence seemed to be permanent. Martin and I went to the lawyer to discuss the accidental divorce. Since the divorce still needed a couple months to finalize, we were able to get the request eliminated and our marriage reinstated without too much hassle.
I suppose I pronounce you man and wife now. Just joking, though. I don't have the authority for that.
One night while Martin was putting the baby to bed, his phone kept ringing. I wasn't in the habit of snooping, but it could have been work-related, and I didn't want him to miss the call. It wasn't work, it was Barbara. She'd left a handful of voicemails, and I listened to the most recent one.
That whore wife of yours isn't any good for you. Martin, please help your mother. My bank says my accounts are frozen.
Martin had control of Barbara's bank accounts, which had been her idea. He'd frozen the accounts so Barbara couldn't access them. Martin had made it clear that Barbara wasn't his mother anymore. For a woman as clingy as Barbara, being alone, poor, and disowned by her son was probably the worst thing she could experience. At least Barbara had raised a good son, even if he'd had to hurt her to be a good father to our daughter. Thanks for watching.